Hello beautiful people, welcome and welcome back to the channel and our applied mechanics lessons. On today's video or today's lesson, I want us to just touch on some stuff that you should absolutely avoid or not do when you are dealing with centroids or when calculating your centroids. I got to mark quite a couple of scripts that had this, and I noticed some common mistakes that people normally make. So the very first and most important one, please make sure that you read the question. If a question doesn't mention anything about you using a volume or mass, then please avoid it by any means necessary. It's quite easy to assume that you got the most difficult question or the most difficult because of not reading a question carefully. So just make sure that you read the question. If the shape is just a very simple shape given on there with its own dimensions, and you just asked to calculate the centroid, then that's what you do. If nothing is mentioned about its density, about a mass, about a volume, then don't expect to shove it in somewhere just because it's something that you saw in the textbook. Okay. Then the next thing that you should absolutely avoid when dealing with your centroid, if you're given a shape like this one, okay, it's given to you as an entire and complete shape. Avoid separating these shapes as you see them, okay? What I mean is, if it was given to you as an eye section, and by looking at it or by inspection, you can already see that it is symmetrical along the x-axis. So if you fold it in half, it will essentially be symmetrical. Might also be symmetrical along the y-axis as well, but it's not always the case. But when you're given a shape like this, avoid separating them and calculating stuff separately. What you can get away with at most is getting the area of each specific section. So if maybe you say this is the first one, second one, third one, the most you'll get away with is calculating the areas because those are not dependent on anything. But the minute you now divide them and you have this there, you have this there, and you have this there, what this means is now it shifts stuff around, and when you're now calculating things like your x bar or your y bar, you will take into account your shape as it is, and that is not how you go about calculating it. So remember, when calculating your x bar or your y bar, once you have redrawn your shape to scale or to the required dimensions, you select or you appoint what we call an axis. Okay, so you'll say, this is my reference point for x, so I'll be taking my x bar from this point going to the right. And then you'll appoint the very bottom of your shape or the very top, it's up to you, and you'll say I'll be taking my y bar directly from the bottom of this shape all the way up. So what this means is, when you're calculating your x bar for shape number 1, for argument's sake, you will be taking the distance from your reference point to half of that point, because remember your x bar would be to the halfway point of that shape, but the key factor is your point of reference. Where are you starting to measure from? Okay, then similarly, if you were trying to get your x bar for your second shape, and I'm assuming you would have divided them like that, still it will be from your point of reference to the middle of your second shape. Similarly for your third one. Okay, then when we look at our y bars, right, we've said that we will be using the bottom as our point of reference. So this means you will be taking all your measurements from the very bottom to the middle of the shape in argument. Okay, so this will be the middle of the first, the middle of the second, the middle of the third. So if you need to take y bar for your very first shape, it will be from this bottom part here to that middle there. That will be your y bar, let's say y bar 1. Similarly, you'll be taking your y bar 2 to the middle of that shape, and your y bar 3 to the middle of your third shape. Okay, now I'll get back to what goes wrong if you don't do it this way. If you've decided to separate your shapes like we see in here, when you calculate your x bar, you are simply gonna take it from that point to the halfway point, and you'll probably get a measurement or dimension there, and then you'll have a value for your x bar. It might be correct for shapes that originally touch on your point of reference. But when you get to a shape like this, which was our shape number 2 on our diagram, you are going to make the mistake of taking your X bar from the beginning to the middle of that shape, forgetting to take into account that space on here that would originally have fallen over here between that hollow and where your reference point starts. Then similarly for your third shape, you're most likely to take your X bar from the beginning to the midpoint, and in this case it would be correct. But in some instances, like where your shape does not touch on the reference point originally, then of course you might make mistakes. Similarly for your Y bar, so remember your Y bar, this is now on the vertical axis, and you're essentially trying to get the distance from your reference point to the midpoint going up or moving along the vertical axis, right? So if you have a diagram of this sort, right? So let's say this would be our shape 1. I'm separating them the way some people do. Then this would be our shape number 2, and this would be our shape number 3, right? On the diagram, if we were to calculate it on this specific diagram, let's say this would be, okay, my diagram is messed up. Let's just give it dimensions. Let's say that's 50, that's 100, and let's make that 50 as well. Okay, for Y bar 1, we are trying to get a reference from the bottom to the midpoint of the first shape right up top. Wait, I made that 500. Why did I make it 500? There we go. Okay, so the midpoint of this 50 point, okay, so you would have 50 divided by 2 because you do want the midpoint, plus 100 plus 50. That would give you your Y bar 1. Okay, your Y bar 2 would be your 100 divided by 2 plus 50, because remember you want the midpoint of that specific shape. Similarly, your Y bar 3 would just be your 50 divided by 2 because that's the one right at the bottom. Okay, so on here this would give us 25, on here this would give us 100, on here this would give us 175. Okay, then now let's try it with this method. Alright, by looking at this shape, let's give it the same dimensions. This is 50, this is 100, and this is 50. Okay, when looking at this, you would simply say Y bar 1 would be 50 over 2, and this is 25. And this would be incorrect because we already know what it is. On here, you'd say your Y bar 2, you would say 100 divided by 2, which is 50, and that is incorrect. The only correct one in this instance would be your Y bar 3 because it doesn't change much. That 50 divided by 2 would still a 50 divided by 2. This is the only one that would be correct. Okay, now the reason why I'm stressing about these values so much is because at the end of the day, you're expected to calculate your areas, right? You would have that table. I prefer the table method because I think it's just easier to put your work together. You have your areas, you have your X bar, you have your area multiplied by X bar, you have your Y bar, then you have your area multiplied by your Y bar. Okay, so if you use a method that divides everything, you would get your areas correct because those don't change. And then when looking at your values for X, you'll most likely get the first one and the second one correct, and that's if you even know how to go about that. The second one, you'd most likely get it incorrect. Then this would obviously affect your area bar X. This you might get correct, this you might get correct. Then there will be a column on here for totals, right? That one you don't really need it. Then if this is incorrect, it means your total on here will be incorrect, right? Then now we're coming to your Y bars, and we said if you're using your method of division, we said your first one would be incorrect, your second one would be incorrect, only the third one would be correct. And this affects your area Y bar 1, area Y bar 2, only the third one will be correct, and already that affects your total. So now when you need to calculate your centroid, you'd say your centroid on the x-axis, and it should be the total of your area bar X over the sum of your areas, right? But since this total here is already incorrect, it means whatever you get is already incorrect. Then similarly for your centroid along the y, total of your area multiplied by y bar over the sum of your area. Okay, already this is incorrect, so this means your answer is incorrect. Then at the end of the day, a question that could have easily scored you 20% or 20 marks or 30. I was very generous with it. A question that should score you many, many marks ends up becoming just a bit foggy, partly cloudy, and I just, for the love of me, can't figure out why you would choose to make your life difficult. Okay, so here's what you do. Now let's go to the positives. Here's what you do. You get a question, you read it carefully, you see the diagram, you make sure that all the dimensions are there, you redraw your shape. Okay, I'll just stick to the shape that we have been using for the longest time. You redraw it, you dimension it accurately so you don't get confused. Okay, then from that point you elect an axis. You say that's where I'll be taking my x, that's where I'll be taking my y. Then you have measurements to the halfway point of each specific shape. Okay, then you draw up your table. You calculate area bar x, area multiplied by bar x, y bar, area multiplied by y bar. You get the total here, total there. Then you plug and play with the formula to get your centroid on the x and your centroid on the y, and that would essentially give you your 4 marks on there. Easy peasy. Okay, don't complicate your life, don't try to separate them so you can see them clearly. It only gets more foggy from that point. I hope this helps, but if for some reason it's still a little bit unclear, you can always leave a comment or email me. I don't mind either or. Until then, adios.